Hey guys, it's Carl Allen. I'm with my business partner, Adam Markley. We're co-founders of Dealmaker Wealth Society and co-founders of Prox Capital Group. And we've been asked a really interesting question recently in the mailbag, and we wanted to talk about it through this little kind of mini Q&A. And it's the question of business seasonality. And a lot of people think business seasonality is just in terms of the seasons or the weather, like an ice cream business will do great in the summer and bad in the winter. A snow cleaning service will do great in the winter and bad in the summer. But Adam, it's a lot deeper than that. There's a lot of other issues, a lot of other reasons why businesses can be very seasonal and very cyclical in terms of how they generate money.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to remember seasonality comes from the nature, quite literally, the weather and the seasons we all experience. But what's really important to remember is that every business has smaller business cycles within their operations. B2B businesses tend to have varied sales cycles as they're working on, say, big contracts or small contracts and things like that. And so understanding and identifying what that seasonality looks like in the business is really important. All businesses, 100% of them, have some level of seasonality to them. And again, when we say seasonality, we really mean a combination of quite literal seasons, but more importantly, the cyclicality of the business, right? I think about Carl and I are currently in process of finalizing the acquisition of a pretty large construction business. Construction by nature has some level of seasonality, more so based on geography, right? So this business is based in the mid-Atlantic on the East Coast of the United States. And there's some seasonality to the business based on when they can actually perform work. When it's really poor weather and really cold out, that negatively impacts their ability to do work. And so part of the metrics of that business are, what are the rainy days every year? What are the really cold days every year? Those are really important kind of identifiers to see how that impacts the cycle. Typically then, that means Q1, winter, is less productive than Q2, 3, and 4. But it doesn't mean it's a net zero game. It just means things slow down a little bit. As Carl mentioned, you've got the ice cream shop, you've got, a ski slope, for example, isn't going to have a whole lot of attraction in the middle of July as opposed to January. So it's important to really understand the cyclicality, and more important, when you're doing a deal, the timing in which you do a deal. I remember talking to a partner of ours in Prox Capital Group, Carl and Maya's investment group, and we were talking to one of our deal partners there, and he was like very jazzed about a tax prep practice, one of those little kind of franchise-esque type services that we see here in the U.S. And the seller was really interested in selling in the April-May timeframe. Well, if you have any idea about that business, they earn 80 to 90% of the revenue in the first 3.5 months of the year. That means you're going to make hardly any money in the balance of the year. So if you're going to do that deal and close, say May 1st, you've got to know going in, you're floating expenses for the rest of the year until you're able to generate cash again. And so it's really important the deal structure then matches the cyclicality of the business itself.
Yeah, I remember the coach company we were looking to acquire up in Scotland, and we looked at that deal, and about 80% of its revenues came from the kind of May through October period, through all the tourism in Scotland and a lot of the cruise ship type activity that they were doing, picking people up from cruise ports and all those different things. And we actually decided if we were going to buy that business, we were going to buy it at the end of April so that we would ride that huge peak of business. We didn't want to buy it in November, which was the original plan, because again, we would have to have substituted the business going forward. And one of the other things that's really interesting, and I know a lot about this from all my days doing very large technology type deals. It's really interesting that a lot of the companies that are out there buying IT systems, computers, software, services, and etc., they tend to spend all their money either in the last kind of 2 months of the year or the first 2 months in the year. So they spend in the last few months because they're trying to spend the remainder of their budget. Otherwise, they're not going to get the same money next year. And then, of course, when their new budgets land in January, they're busily spending that money upgrading their IT system. So most technology businesses they're super, super busy in that kind of 4 months straddling January the 1st, but the rest of the year, a buyer's got to cover all of those costs as well. So there's just so many different things, Adam, that impact seasonality. It's weather, it's key dates in the calendar, like Easter, Mother's Day for gift companies. It's how budgets are set and all those different things. A lot of businesses that are servicing schools and education, they tend to run through when the educational practices are actually in place versus the kind of summertime when they're not. So I think the important lesson here is, this is why we always ask sellers for the kind of interim monthly financials over the last couple of years, so you can see what the seasonality of the business is. You can see how the revenues go up and down. You can see how the profits go up and down, and you can see how the working capital on the balance sheet goes up or down as well. So whatever time of year you're buying that business, what's coming from what you've seen historically in that business.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just the sales or cash cycle itself. As Carl's saying, seeing where the financials are at different points along the journey are really important, because you're going to prevent yourself from walking into a situation, buying a company, and then realizing you're cash poor. You've got to pour more capital in just to keep the business afloat while you're waiting for the business cycle to come through. And that's just not a situation you want to be in. I remember I was working for a large education company several years ago, and while most of their funding came from state and federal governments, they're effectively supporting public school students. The sales cycle itself, where you're attracting students, was hyper focused into a 5 or 6 month period, spring into summer, as people are evaluating what they're doing for the following school year. So it's really important to understand that the cash flows themselves aren't just the revenue coming in. It also has to tail and track to the actual expenses for acquiring that business, right? Or for attracting the new revenue. So in that particular case, we'd see a massive swing of marketing spend in the late spring into summer months. I mean, very disproportionately high. And while the revenue isn't going up tied to that increase in spend, that revenue increase will hit following school year. And so you've got a lag there, and you've got to know, if I were to buy that business, I wouldn't. It's $500 million business. Doesn't fit our criteria, Carl. But the idea there is that you've got to go knowing in, like, listen, I've got this period of time where I'm going to be ramping my spend up, but the revenue that's tied to that spend isn't coming for another 4 months, 6 months, whatever that cycle looks like. And so that's just really important. If people are working on, say, federal contracts or things like that, understand those are good collectible invoices, but they don't get paid very quick. And so you've got to understand the cash cycles, the cash mechanisms that then tie into the bigger seasonality and business cycles that each individual business goes through. Again, they all have it 100% of the time, right? Most businesses experience some level of slowdown, IT as a potential exception there, right around the year-end holidays, the Christmas season, and all that. It's because a lot of people are taking off for vacation. Other businesses see slowdown during the summer because, again, people are going on vacation. And so there's just different levels of impact from each of those things, and each business will be slightly different. You've got to just look for it, understand it, and be able to tie it together with the actual financials, those monthly ones, so you can see what's actually happening.
Yep, perfect. So what's our big number one tip for our readers? Is it as simple as just getting the interim numbers and being able to see the patterns over time, and then making sure you're buying the business at the right time and you've got enough runway of cash to take you through, whatever lull period you might have in terms of the seasonality?
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. But for me, the number one tip isn't just getting those financials. The number one tip is that deal structure will always drive success of the deal, right?
Yeah.
You make your money on the buy. It's the same thing with real estate. You don't make your money when you sell, actually. You make it when you buy, because the price in which you buy it and the structure in which you buy it is ultimately what dictates your future cash flows and then your ability to grow the company. And so for me, that would be my number one tip is you've got to understand the overall seasonality and cyclicality of the business so that you can create a deal structure that fits the business no matter where in the cycle you're actually acquiring it.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Adam. That was really, really interesting. So I hope you guys found that really, really useful. And we'll see you guys soon for a next little micro Q&A with questions from the mailbag. And if you've got a specific question that we haven't answered yet, feel free to email us on Confessions of a Dealmaker, and we'll do one of these little mini sessions for you. So I hope you found that useful, and we'll see you guys soon. Until then, bye for now.